Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're calling from. This is now our eighth digital portfolio management launch and learn. Today, we'll be joined by Colin O'Brien. He's going to be talking to us about digital product release and its relationship with DPM. This is our second to last session. We sent a separate invite for the last session, which is going to be a roadmap discussion. If you do not get that invitation or you missed it somehow, please let me know. Happy to forward you the invite and see you in a couple weeks. But with that, I will hand it off to Colin. You should have the ability to share, Colin. Let me know if you need.
Yes. Yep, so let me share my screen. Get all the Zoom stuff out of the way and switch back over to PowerPoint. Okay, is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes.
Looks good.
All right.
Yes,
Perfect.
looks good.
Thanks everybody for joining. As Chris said, my name is Colin O'Brien. I am on the product management team, working on re-implementing our support for the release management space. And digital product release is the current working name. It is subject to change because it still has to go through naming committee and just final validations, but it's what we're using at this point. And it's important to note this name and why we're calling it digital product release versus just simply release management, which I'll get into in a little bit. But because this is futures, we're planning to release with Washington. But since it's being recorded, the lawyers will make sure that I've showed this. This is a forward-looking vision statement, so don't make buying decisions based off of this. A lot of things I'm going to be showing today are already implemented, and we actually did a hidden lab release last Thursday. But again, things are always subject to change, so just keep that in mind. So this is my kind of general PowerPoint. I'm going to walk through, give a bit of background as to what we're trying to accomplish this time around with release management. I'll go through the kind of process that we're looking at and go through a demo so that you can understand what we're building, how we're approaching release management this time around. So let's start with what our vision is. So we're really trying to focus on how we help to automate the release process. So we're looking to be more of a process orchestrator. We're not trying to be like a deployment orchestrator, at least not at this point. That allows product teams to validate that their releases are ready. We're effectively trying to provide the benefits that the release governance process provides, but without the overhead that it typically incurs. So that's why the process orchestration and also the connection with the rest of kind of the ServiceNow value stream is important. So we are building in explicit connections to bridge the planning that's in the SPM business unit with their strategic planning workspace. Release will then pull in data from DevOps change and the DevOps integrations, and will explicitly link out into change management and into the broader ITSM world, while providing metrics that will be consumable. Caitlin and I have been working on what should that look like. So again, we're bridging things, so we're using the concepts that already exist within the common services data model, so that we're not having to try to get you to use yet another record to relate to things like products and services. So let me skip a couple slides just to kind of further emphasize that this is connected. So as I said earlier, we're calling it digital product release because we're specifically focusing this user experience based on how we deliver digital products, so software effectively. Because with release management, while many of the concepts can apply to things like infrastructure releases or for like general hardware releases, the experience, the kind of things that are important to those teams are different. And this time around, instead of providing kind of a general kind of framework, which release V2 was more of a general framework that you could implement your own experience on top of. This time we're really focused on the experience of how we deliver software. So that's why digital product release. And it starts, if you are using SPM, it's going to start on more of that intake. What are the things that you want to work on? You'd prioritize all of that in SPM. And then release kind of links together to say, okay, we now know what we've prioritized. We've kind of decided what we want to release. Now let's track that delivery. So release management is really going to be focused on how we track the delivery to track the readiness of the software that you're building. And we'll be connecting in with the DevOps data model and with DevOps change so that as work is going on, you've got stories in Jira that you're wanting to capture. You have test results coming out of your CI/CD pipeline or security scans coming out of your pipeline, and you want to pull that information in order to validate that we are ready before we raise or before we authorize the change request. We want to move that earlier so that it becomes more of a data-driven approach. And then again, we have some explicit connections between release and change that we are building in order to make the change process hopefully simpler, because we found with a lot of customers we've been interviewing that the change management process has effectively become overloaded with a lot of release management concepts. So we hope to help your change teams to have a simpler, more streamlined change process that connects with release. So all of those activities can happen earlier instead of finding out that, no, we can't actually deploy because you missed something, a day before you're trying to deploy your software. So that's the vision for what we are building. So another thing that I'll just skip the personas. Another thing that we're really tackled on is, what does this process look like? So what I'm going to be going through when I get into the demonstration is, starting with what is the scope from the release. We're working with the SPM team to have an explicit shared concept of what we call a product feature. So this is what you want, to be delivered, what you want to be evaluated to say. This could be something like, we want to support single sign-on. It's not the how that you implement, it's the what it is that you want. So we define our scope and we plan that scope into versions. And we're very explicitly now bringing the concept of a version out into digital product release. Because again, release is about how we validate this new version getting out the door. So you'll say, here's what we want to be in this version that we will release. Then we work on selecting the actual date for the release. We can select the process that we want to follow for this particular release. Then we start executing. We validate that the release is actually ready, and that happens before deployment. Deployment is still within change management. There is no plans to alter that in any way, because change management is really that final authorization to say that, yes, we've done everything necessary in order to deploy. However, change will have the ability to see into the release to say, what were the activities that went on that, as someone on the cab, or if you're automating that process with DevOps change, you will be able to leverage this data on better evaluating, did we do all of our activities? So let's, are there any, and I'm not monitoring chat. So, Chris or Caitlin, if some question comes up in chat, just let me know. Otherwise I'll continue.
Will do. We're good for now.
Perfect. So that's kind of the general process. But before I switch into the demonstration to kind of show you how that works, I want to break down these to really kind of talk about what it is that we're doing. So we start with that notion of planning a version. We've split out the notion of a version from a release. A release delivers a version. So this gives you the ability long-term to be able to associate like your application services to say, this is the version that's actually running on this application service by splitting out these concepts. So a version has what features, what things this version is going to have, and you will plan that from more of a backlog into the versions themselves. Those features, those product features, we're calling them, then break down into the work items. This is the tie-in with the DevOps data model to be able to say that this particular feature is implemented by these work items. This will give you the ability to have policies that we'll talk about in a moment that can look and say, have we completed all of the work items, the stories or the epics, that have they all been approved? Have they all been signed off on by the product owner? Those work items, through how the DevOps data model works, will be able to connect to the code itself. So if you're needing to do an audit, what were the things that actually changed? Then we will have a link to the code itself that says, here's what we actually implemented. Or if you're doing root cause analysis and you're trying to understand with problem management, what changed, where do the developers need to go and look? We'll have that traceability. Will also be tied to the builds themselves. So your CI/CD pipeline is producing builds, is producing artifacts. We'll have a link there so that we can also talk about what all the test cases are. So we're creating a complete traceability to say, here's what your teams planned to deliver. Did they implement them? What implemented them? How were they tested? How are they validated? And be able to have that complete chain of custody from plan to the actual implementation. So once you have defined what it is that you want to work on, next is when you want to deliver it. So I'll give the example, and I made up version numbers for our products. But if you plan to deliver a new version, like I'll use ServiceNow as an example, we plan to deliver digital product release with Washington. So our 1.0, our version 1.0 is like, I have my scope of what's in 1.0. I plan to deliver it with Washington. Washington's a nice name around a date. February is, I believe, the go live, like first week in February, would be the go live for this product, because we're using the store in order to deliver this. So I've got my version, I have when, and that also then gives me the process for what are all the activities that I need to accomplish to ensure that I'm on track and that I am ultimately ready to release when the Washington timeframe actually hits. So we're separating out that what from when, and the release is ultimately validating that we are ready for that new version based on the timelines we need. And then finally, this is all underpinned by policies. So these would be the requirements. These are things like, are all stories accepted? Are test results above 85%? Do we have any critical security vulnerabilities? And if we have any, then that's not allowed. We have to have those fixed before we can release. It can also be things, some customers that I've worked with, they've provided their policy documents to me so we can start putting together a library that customers can use when they first install this. But another one is, are all of the versions of our components the same in our staging environment as they are in production? That data is just looking at the CMDB. So instead of having a person manually go and check, do I have the same version of each of the libraries that we care about? Are they the same in sub-prod as they are in prod? That's a policy that you would be able to represent in digital product release. And if it's data that ServiceNow has, and this data could originate from anywhere, so long as we're able to collect it and store it in ServiceNow, then you would be able to use it to automate the evaluation of that policy. Now, they could just be what I'll call manual attestations. You could have a task that says, has the QE team signed off on it? Is UAT finished? Those could just be approvals that someone has to go in and attest to. But it's a whole lot better when we just say, let's look at the test results. Are they above whatever our criteria is? Let's look at the scans from SonarQube. Do we have any critical vulnerabilities? Let's look at the CMDB. Do we have proper service levels defined for the application service? Because maybe that's one of your policies. If ServiceNow has the data, then you will be able to use these policies to help keep you on track. And these policies are exit criteria to move from one phase of the release to the next. So it's all underpinned by these policies. That's how we're able to provide the benefits that the release governance provides, but without the overhead that typically incurs by someone having to manually go and collect all of the evidence to ensure that, yes, we have done whatever it is that we as a company have said we need to do in order to say that we are ready for our release. So that's the end of my slides. I was going to switch over into to one of my instances to show you how we're doing this. But are there any questions in chat at this point, or any questions before I switch over?
We do have a couple questions from Mike Cezanne. He asks, what CI class are you targeting to release from a majority 80-20 rule, assuming app service is below services and offerings?
Yeah, so anything can be the target. A product, which the UX that you'll be seeing in a moment, I try to avoid using CI terminology because most of the teams that I work with, they don't know the difference between an application model and a software model. And honestly, I didn't either until I spent a lot of time with Mark Bodman, who is one of our CSDM architects and specialists. But like if, application model and software model sound like synonyms in English, at least. It's kind of like normal change and standard change. Normal and standard mean the same thing in English, but they have two very different meanings in the context of change management. So an application model is basically your product. It doesn't have a version, just the product. Software model is a version of that product. So those are both models. Those models can be linked to whatever CI class that you will have for production. I typically say application service because that's the recommendation of the CSDM, but really any CI class could have the model. I believe it's model ID is the actual field. You could actually have any target of a change request say that this is now the software model that is associated with a service, an application service. It could just be an application. Whatever you tend to use, they all technically work. But I am leaning into more about the application service because that's the recommendation of where applications deploy to. But there's nothing in our architecture enforcing it.
Yeah, I like to just make sure that there's clarity there. I mean, I don't want to be rigid or anything like that, but as companies mature and they this audience here is very familiar with the CSDM model. So we see the business application at the top in the design phase as it drops down into the operational piece of it, down into the orange where we have application services and their associated offerings to the technical and business services. Mm-hmm. We see that as okay, then let's fit that into the whole. If you're trying to figure out a life cycle of a digital thing, mm-hmm. then you'd want to be able to follow what we see in CSDM4 right now. So as soon as you jump out of that, for me, it kind of blows me out a little bit, right? So that's why.
So we're following.
Focus that. Yeah.
Yeah, we're following the CSDM4 recommendations, and I'm working with Scott and Mark on the data foundation side on the proposal for CSDM5 because it'll be incorporating some of the concepts that I'm building now. So application model is the kind of top thing. Application model then connects to the business application. So there's a link between those. And in fact, I believe they are releasing with Vancouver. I think it starts deactivated, but it's recommended that will keep your business applications in sync with application models so that you'll have that. Then application model also has the SDLC component, which that's the DevOps side. So an application model will have that link to the SDLC component, which has the work items and the code commits and the pipeline runs and all of that. And then it will have the software model to represent the versions of it. And digital product release is trying to hide that complexity. We're simply showing you the pieces, knowing that that's how they're supposed to work. Everything up until deploy. When you get to deploy and you have whatever your CI is that you want to target for a change request, that's where we recommend things like application service and the other recommendations of CSDM4, but we're not enforcing it at this point to where it must be like an application service.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions before I switch over to the demo? I saw there were I saw a number next to chat, so just want to see if there are any other questions.
We have one fairly long, Lou. I don't know if you want to come off mute and ask your question. Or
Thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Yeah, so the application model, as you indicated, is there. It's tied to the business portfolio via the model ID. The software models also have a product. They're based on a product. Both have life cycle phases. If you're opting into the content library system, ServiceNow provides the lifecycle information if they can get it from, the public domain, which is not always available, and it's big gargantuan, endeavor to maintain all of that. So the question really is, I don't think there's any expectation to maintain the lifecycle information at the application model. So in release management that you're talking about the version. Well, if you have an application model, you, I believe, have to add, this is, version 1.0 or version 2.0 by adding a general availability date to the lifecycle phase of that application model. I just never saw, because we opt into the content library, that ServiceNow provides that for application models, but certainly they do for software models. So am I missing something here? How that's going to relate to your new release management implementation come Washington?
No, so we are, right now we're minimally interacting with the lifecycle status, the lifecycle state of the software model. It's actually one of the areas we are investigating at the moment, how we could automate, especially for custom. So when it comes from the content library, that's generally like, let's say you are using release management to manage your ServiceNow release. In that case, the lifecycle is pulling in from what's the state of the COTS software, versus if it's custom, like if it's in-house, then the lifecycle status is really based on you setting the lifecycle status. We already have implemented some of the things to like say that the release is in the build lifecycle status, as an example, when it starts, basically. We're still investigating how much more we should lean into the lifecycle states, because we're doing it minimally at the moment. So if it's something that you are interested in, if something that you have an opinion with, I am happy for you to reach out to me, and we can set some time up. Because the only reason we haven't dug in anymore is because I don't have any requests at this point. None of the customers I have in my design partner program have an opinion on how that should work. So we're trying to stay minimal at the moment.
Pretty good idea. I'd be happy to reach out to you. I would just be clear, make the distinction between the life cycle stage and life cycle stage status on the model,
Mhm.
which basically
Yep.
means that, hey, this stuff's no longer valid. We're going to retire it, or it's going to be in
Correct.
build or whatever. That's different than the life cycle phases, which are relative
Yes.
to the versions. So
Yep.
yeah, the combination of those two working together in conjunction with how you're going to model this new product is, I think, is an important point. Look forward to talking about in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. And I don't remember if I've got my name explicitly on this, but I should be on the invite. It's just colin.o'brien at servicenow.com. So feel free to email and we can set up some time.
Thank you.
All right, any other last questions before I kind of show some of what we've built so far, knowing that we're still months away from GA?
Nothing in the chat, but y'all feel free to come off mute if you do have a question. You don't have to throw it in chat.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt my feelings if you interrupt me. So I'll make sure to watch the time, but I don't mind being interrupted. Okay, so I switched over into one of my instances. This is running the lab release. So we, again, did a hidden lab release last Thursday. If it's something that you want to evaluate in subprod, send me an email and I'll send you the instructions on how to get it. Because I'm basically wanting anybody who installs this, I'm wanting to get your feedback on what you think about it, because that's going to help influence our last half push to GA. But we do have basically a working version at this point. So it starts off with what we have as policies. So if you have seen anything with DevOps config, then you will be aware of the policy system. This is leveraging what's known as the policy as code engine. And it looks like, of course, my instance is deciding to be slow at the moment. But the policy as code engine is basically a way for you to define what your policies are and have them evaluated using, well, originally code. Now it's a little bit of a misnomer because you can do the policy as code engine. And there we go. I guess it timed me out at first. So you can do it with a condition builder in order to specify what your policies are. But I have a policy that says all release tasks are closed, and I'm not going to build them out just in the interest of time. But you can basically say, I want to look up all releases. I'm sorry, all the tasks in the current phase that, and get a count of how many are closed or how many are not closed. Because then not closed means unless it's zero, then we're not compliant with this policy. But you can have as many policies as you like. We will be, and think of this as a library. These are reusable across your releases. We're going to be shipping with a content pack that has the most common policies that customers have provided as feedback. Things like, tasks being closed, approvals all being completed. We'll also have things around stories and around test cases and security scans and several others based on, again, the common feedback. But if you needed to have more than a release, like a release manager, release admin, someone who owns the policy side of release would be able to define new policies and maintain them within this list of reusable policies across your different kinds of releases. Because these policies are then leveraged with our release templates. So release templates are our way
We got
to...
a question in chat here.
Oh, sure.
Mike asks, interested to see where this shows up in DPM or the plan to bubble it up there.
I will say that the status of these policies will bubble up into the phases of our release. So we'll know whether or not the phases themselves are compliant, non-compliant, or really what's the risk status? Because all the policies being non-compliant at the beginning of a phase, kind of normal. But as you get closer to the end of a phase, the risk starts to creep up. So risk and status were what we're really thinking about exposing, not the details of the individual policies. However, if the details of individual policies would be useful, again, that's an area where we're working on designing what provides value. Do you need the details or just the aggregate based on what's happening in the details?
Yeah, thanks. No, I was just, it's more of a comment to, hopefully we have enough time, since this is a DPM launch and learn, that it's, you know, we see where this plays into DPM, the overall product of this release, why we care, you know, why we should care about it from a DPM perspective.
Yeah, and I can jump in real quick. So just adding to what Colin shared, we have been Colin and I have been connecting on how his product is shaping up and where those linkages really make sense. And a lot of the decisions that we like to make when it comes to DPM is really based on you know, your feedback as users and customers, and what data will make sense to surface in DPM and how to surface that. And so the idea today is to share, you know, what's coming, and also to gather interest in participating or in sharing expectations that will help us, you know, prioritize how we surface this data into DPM. So, you know, feel free to add in the chat, or you can message me directly if you want to have a conversation. So everything that Colin is sharing, I think, will be, you know, really good context for what the product is going to shape up to be, and then how we can, you know, bring those linkages into the DPM workspace.
Got it. So it's an awareness of potential inputs from this product, but it's not there yet. That's just it's just bringing awareness of what could be. Got
Absolutely. It. Yeah, because like Colin said, this is kind of early stages. It's not, you know, GA yet. And he's still working on refining and fully building out all the key features. And so what we would do is, you know, we would align once he's getting there. And again, in terms of what will make sense, you know, based on your feedback. So.
Got it. Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. So these, and because of this, I'm not spending a lot of time on how setup works, because this provides context. I'm going to spend more of my time on more the product and release side in just a moment. But policies then can go into the templates themselves, which templates are, this is actually based on some very common requests I got from customers on Release V2. You can have multiple templates. These let you know what are the various phases that you know commonly exist for a kind of release. As well as, if I go into manage real quickly, so I can click through a couple of areas, allows us to see the process. So there we go. So for the phases themselves, this would be, again, what are the phases of the release? There we go. So in this case, I have like scoping is 10 days. Like that's when we can, you know, continue to put things into the release. Development goes on for 30 days. UAT is 10 days, and I gave deployment a couple of days window. So these are the phases that we'd be tracking, and those phases can then have tasks. Which tasks? I don't think I added any. Yeah, I didn't with this one, but I can have tasks which maybe are just activities themselves, or they can be tasks that need an explicit approval. So someone attesting to the fact that a thing happened, like, you know, QE sign off or UAT was complete or scoping was complete. Those are the fallback for when you don't have data that we can use for policies to say that certain activities have to have been finished. And policies can be leveraged across multiple phases. So I can have the same policy that has to be evaluated once during scoping, again during deployment, or development. Development I could have, this is where normally like stories would come in. UAT might have testing. Deploy might look at things like, are the change requests all closed? And closed in a complete state. You could have maybe post-release here. But this allows us to reuse a common set of activities that you need in order to ensure that you are ready for the release, instead of having to define it each time. And then lastly, we have the dates that we would be targeting. So the calendar is managed by the central release team on when is it that we can do a release. So I think I created one the other day here, in October. So I had one at the end of October. I only have one release right now targeting this particular date, but I would be able to see releases. I'd also be able to see changes. So we'll have a date concept where I can just say, what are all of the releases that are planned for a specific day? What are all the change requests for those releases? We'll also be able to roll up. So those are the kind of fundamentals that the release team defines, the policies, templates, and the dates themselves. And then on the other side, this is where we have the product piece to it. So again, I'm using the term products here. I'm not calling it application model because while, for those of us on this call, we understand what that means. Most of the people in the release world don't know what an application model is. They don't know what a software model is. So I would be able to have what all of my products are. And this would be either application models, also business applications. So we're going to ensure that it all shows up here. So if you're thinking to like your either personal portfolios, where you have a collection of business applications that you are wanting to manage, then those would be linked here as well. We're using the exact same concepts. Now, I don't yet have the hierarchy built in like you have with personal portfolios and DPM. That is a piece that's on my roadmap. So eventually I will be consuming the portfolio concepts. That way you'll be able to organize these instead of just seeing the list of either everything or the list of just what are your products, but that's future state for me. But the fact that we're leveraging the exact same entity means that there's not going to be some additional connection that you will have to make within your personal portfolios. They'll just, once we have the right metrics, the right things that you want to see, they'll start just showing up instead of you having to do additional wiring to make sure that we are in fact connecting the two. And then as I drill, go ahead. Yep.
Yeah. So is there a dependency on the on using PPM with this? Because I saw the phases there, and with the agile development out of the box capabilities, a product associates to a release, and a release will associate to a project would then associate to a phase. On the other side, the release associates to a group and then to a sprint, because if you're not using PPM, right? So you can use agile both ways. So is there a dependency that you have to have a project and then the phase with this release management?
No, it's the same terminology, but different concepts. So, and even the Agile release, so my background, I've been in the Agile world for the vast majority of my career. When I came to ServiceNow, it was for a quote unquote break from that portion. And that break happened for about a year before I became the owner of our at first Agile products, and then DevOps. And now I've got release that I'm trying to shore up. The Agile release was actually not meant to be used in more of a release management function. That's kind of an artifact of Scrum being poor at naming some things. Safe doesn't do any better. But the Agile release was actually the precursor, if you follow Safe, to a planning increment, which is, it's meant to be something that, like if a sprint is 2 weeks, an Agile release is maybe 4 sprints or 5 sprints. And it's supposed to always be that number of sprints. You may or may not deploy at the end of it. You may deploy in the middle of it. It was meant for planning purposes, not for validating that a product is ready. But there are relationships that are there. They do exist, so that you can kind of line some of them up. But RM release, which was what was meant to be for release management, is different from a Scrum release, which is meant more for planning. So that's a thing that we're also kind of fixing and clarifying. So to take a short question and answer in a very long way, there is no dependency. These are different concepts. You could still use an Agile release, but it's meant to be used for longer term story planning and not validating that a new version of a product is ready. They have two different things, but unfortunately share the same name.
That was an awesome answer. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And here's the thing. The reason I could answer it like that is because I have literally been answering it for nearly 20 years now. So it is prevalent. It's everywhere. It's actually why the Scaled Agile framework, which I was involved with them pretty early on, doesn't call it a release anymore. They call it a planning increment. It used to be a program increment. They've just renamed it to planning increment because of that confusion.
Right on. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. But the concept of a project's phase and the concept of a release phase are similar. Release management in that respect is almost like a simplified version of project management. But it's something where it's meant for validating things instead of necessarily doing something. The doing in release is only meant to be there in support of validation. Whereas project management, it's about how you implement something. But similar concepts and therefore similar names. So just to real quickly drill in. So again, this product itself has features. Features is a new concept. SPM is adopting it. It will be more explicitly in CSDM 5. And therefore won't really require licenses. It'll be in lots of places. But features are, again, what it is that you want. The epics and stories that could come from Jira or from Azure DevOps or from Rally or any other Agile planning tool, those are the how we validate that it actually happened. So this effectively becomes your scope of the release. And the epics and stories are how it gets implemented and should take place either in Agile 2.0, which again, my first product here, so it's my baby. I want everyone using Agile 2.0. That being said, if you're using Jira and ADO, it'll function the exact same way. You just want to have those connected, and then from there you would be able to do release planning to say, given I have my features, which versions do I want to tag it? And again, versions are software models. So it is actually one of the places where if I were to edit this version, I can't completely get rid of the term, although it does show up here. It is a software model. We are exposing things like the lifecycle stage and status, as well as the other status here. This is an area where we don't really have a lot of feedback on how customers would actually want to use it. Now that we're going to provide an explicit way of validating them with release management. So if this is an area where you are either using it or you have some thoughts about it, please reach out. It's a discussion we're having internally that I don't have a lot of customer evidence on how customers would use it. But we do have this version here. If you are using software asset management, there will be a lot more on this page. We are working with software asset management in order to help with people that are doing releases of off-the-shelf software. But that's why we're explicitly using this as the version itself. And so you would be able to plan what features go in which versions. Once you know that it's set, you would be able to, don't know why my menu went away, but beta software, that happens. You would be able to create a version or create a release. And that is where I'm actually going to jump to because I'm already in a release here. This is my October release. It is for the product of attendance and payroll. It is the version 1.0. So a release always is validating a version of a product. That is intentional. And then we are able to track for this particular release execution what the phases are that we're in. We'll be able to see information about it. We'll be able to track the various tasks, which again, I don't think I have any, and my add task button actually doesn't do anything at the moment, so I can't add a task here. And where I'd be able to see for my policies as they run, you'll be able to track the status of them. This would effectively update the status of the release. We have both state and status. Status is things like red, amber, and green. So your traditional RAG status versus the state, which a state of a release is like it's pending, it's in progress, it's completed. Those are I think there's one more state that we have for it. So we are tracking both of them, but the state of the policies would update the risk and status of the release itself, or of the phase, which would then roll up to the release itself. And then we also have the connection to the features to say, here is my feature. This is, an epic for it. This epic is planned. Does this epic have children? It does. So here are the stories. Some of the stories are work in progress. I guess my Jira doesn't update the parent when the children start going, but you'd be able to track all of this information, and you can't update it. So very intentionally, you cannot update the status of things like stories here. You would need to go into Jira. I've got a link over here that would then navigate me out to my Jira instance to make any updates, because this is leveraging the DevOps data model. You won't have to implement DevOps change in order to leverage digital product release, but you would be able to connect to your tools so that we can get the data from them in order to provide information that's important for your teams. Now, what's missing, because we have a bunch more tabs that the development team is actively working on here, some more navigation elements. The core things that we are actively working on right now are bringing over the testing information that would come from your pipelines. So we would be able to roll up the test results to the release itself. We are connecting with change management. So we've added a field. If you're using digital product release, we've added a field to the change request that references the software model that this release is validating. That way, the change record itself, instead of only having what is changing, so which application service is changing, I'm going to say that generically. It could be a different CI type, CI class, but let's say it's an application service that you've raised your change request for. Instead of just knowing that our prod instance is getting changed, the software model reference will allow you to know what about it is changing. So we're planning to deploy a new version of our product to this application service. So there's now an explicit link between them, so your change team will know what is changing. That way, they'll be able to see into what's going on in this release. Are all of the policies passing? Like, are they all compliant? Have we done everything that's necessary? Do we need to see into stories and into test results? We'll have that direct linkage. And one of the proposals that we are making, this will probably be off by default, but something we're going to ship with, is once that change closes, we would update the model ID field on that CI to reference the software model. That way, you will have better traceability as to what is actually running on that service, or whether on that application service, or whatever CI class that you use. And you'll also be able to see that change over time. So you'll know as you have new versions on the application service, we'll work on keeping that up to date for you, instead of someone having to manually keep the app service up to date with the model, that the software model. that represents what's actually running on it. And that should also be an area where we could provide some additional information on the DPM side, because if your application services that you're managing, you'll know what is running on them. We can start doing some interesting additional correlations on, when was maybe a defect found, was a problem raised that was introduced in a certain version, but when was it resolved? There's also some discussions I'm having with the SecOps team about being able to link vulnerabilities and say that this vulnerability affects these versions, which could be deployed to more than one app service. You could have different app services running different versions, especially if you have some sort of like a ASP model or SaaS model for some of your products, where you can actually track what's running where, and just have a better idea of it through that explicit connection between change and release that is in active development right now. So I can't, I don't have a good instance. I checked earlier today. The team's nightly instance wasn't functioning properly. So I can't demo the change portion, but that is being worked on right now. So we've got about five minutes left. I like to hold a little bit of time at the end for any additional questions that may have come up. Or, I won't tell your boss if you leave early and want to take 5 to do something else. Either way, it's fine with me.
Any questions for Colin? Quiet bunch today.
All right, well then last, I'll just so it's easier to get it, since I did forget to put my explicit email in here. So my name, down here at the bottom, there is no apostrophe in the email address. Sometimes I have worked places where they did put the apostrophe in my email address. That caused issues. Thankfully at ServiceNow it doesn't. So colin.o'brien@servicenow.com. If you have additional things that you'd like to talk with me about release management, if you think that your company would be a good candidate for trying out the lab release and you'd like to get a link to it so you could install it in subprod, then feel free to reach out to me and we'll get you set up.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Colin. Very much appreciate the great presentation today. Thank you everyone for attending. Again, we have one last session of this digital portfolio management launch and learn. It's a separate invite, so if you do not receive that, please let me know. As always, I'll be sending a recap email along with all the recordings for not just this session, but all of our previous sessions, and a follow-up email. You should receive that sometime Friday morning. The other thing, there will be an exit survey in that email. I might actually send that as a separate email. Please, I implore that you fill out this launch and learn exit survey. It really helps us to understand how we can better manage these programs, how we can make them better work for you, and really get some benefit from both sides. With that, though, thank you everyone for attending, and you enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thanks all.